Well, if you want to thumb over to 2 Kings 5, this series is taking us back to the Old Testament. So we're going to be in the first half of the book. We're going to be in 2 Kings 5 today. But I want to set this up a little bit. We're not going to read it just quite yet. I just want to kind of paint a picture of where we're going and what we're doing with this series. So how many of you, I know that I don't feel like I'm that old, okay? Can I just say that? Like, I will turn 40 next year, which to some of you young adults, like, oh, that's getting kind of old, dude. I still feel like I'm 23, okay? I don't know what it is about that age. I did buy my first business. I did move out. So it's like, I guess that's when I kind of became a self-sustaining adult. And so I've just sort of mentally, I've always kind of stayed. Now, hopefully I've grown and matured. But for most of us in the room here today, you remember when family photo albums were an actual like 3-inch book or binder you would get off the shelf and open and look through old family photos, right? I didn't get any of them because they're 4 hours away at my mother's house, but she has volumes upon volumes. And my mom was a very organized person, and so they were in chronological order, and it wasn't always exactly 1 year per book, but you could start with the older ones and sort of see the progression of family photos of myself and my brother and our family members. And I was very fortunate, and some of you have heard this before. I had a very large number, or above average, maybe I should say, of my family members still living. There were 5 generations. I had both of my grandmothers, both of my immediate grandfathers, and 4 of my great-grandmothers, all living up until middle school. We had a lot of funerals there about the mid to late 90s. But I had Grandma Great. We had to get creative with the names because so many of them were alive. So one of my great-grandmas was called Grandma Great, and we had Grandma Lappin and Grandma Pat and Grandpa Robert. This whole, and I do have a big family. Christmas at my grandma's house, especially growing up, was usually not less than like 50 people. It was a family affair. But we used to love at these special times of the year to pull the big photo albums out and just flip through the pictures and look. And one of the things that we would do is we would look, especially as some of those beloved family members had passed on, we would look back at pictures. I can go back and look at pictures of, oh, you remember when we used to have family gatherings at Grandma Lappin's house? She's no longer with us, but do you remember what that was like? Do you remember what she was like? What was she about? And it helped us bring to mind, what are the people we came from? Like, what were they about? What were they like? We need to remember because we come from them, and we want to take the best and go. Now, some of us come from family backgrounds, and I'm not saying mine's excluded from this, but I do feel blessed that for the most part, I felt our family was functional. Some of us come from a family background that feels very dysfunctional, or maybe we didn't know our parents. And so it can be harder to relate to that. So I don't want to paint a rosy picture that, everything is sunshine and rainbows and be ignorant of the fact that not everybody maybe had a great family experience. But in this series, what we're going to do is we're going to look at some Old Testament characters, but we want to look at them in the context of this is going through our Kingdom Family album. So these are not just characters in a story that we read about because of some religious duty. These are like our kingdom ancestors. These are, and I don't know how many greats we'd have to add on there to get back to, Naaman that we're going to look at today. But we're looking at these people as our forebears, our ancestors. We're part of that family. We are part of the family of God. And we're going to see as we go through some of these stories, their past was not perfect. There's not everything that we see that we're going to want to emulate, but we are going to pick up on some key things that I think we could call family values that we do want to draw on, that we do want to emulate and continue to carry on even centuries and centuries later. All right, so we're going to do that. We're going to look at Naaman this week, and we'll have a few other. These are all going to be Old Testament characters, though. We believe like the whole Bible is good for teaching, right? And so even though we tend to be in the New Testament a lot, and there's good reason for that, we're going to take these next 6 or 8 weeks and focus on some of these folks back when. All right, so let's look at Naaman, and then we'll draw out some of the things that I think God is wanting to say to us today. This is 2 Kings 5. We're not going to read all of it, but this is a story about the healing of Naaman. So Naaman, I'm going to just go ahead and fill in a few details to sort of set the stage, because it starts out, well, let me go ahead and read these first couple of verses, and then I'll add some additional context. Chapter 5, verse 1, Naaman was a general of the army under the king of Aram. He was important to his master, who held him in the highest esteem because it was by him that God had given victory to Aram. A truly great man, but afflicted with a grievous skin disease. So I just want to pause here and just paint a picture of Naaman. This was a man, you could say he was a man of valor. You know, like he was, if I could just use my, he was an important dude. Like, he was important to the king because of how successful he had been in battle. We're going to read some stuff later that would support this, but I also could hypothesize, I think Naaman was an angry dude. Do we know some angry people? But you know, if your position is leading armies and battalions to war, that might actually serve that purpose. I would hypothesize that Naaman's anger or wrath or his ability to sort of get in touch with that place and operate out of that may have been part of his success in battle. But it says he had brought the king many battles. So he was well thought of, he was well accomplished, and because of how he was viewed by the king, he would also be a man that had status, or we might say privilege today. You know, so I just want to paint that picture. And yet, it says that he has a grievous skin disease. Now, the most common thought is that, I shouldn't say the most common. It's commonly assumed that this was leprosy. It may or may not have been. There's some debate about that, whether is that, because there was a number of different conditions. The exact one doesn't matter. The point is, all of Naaman's privilege and status and accomplishment didn't exempt him from being afflicted with this disease. But what's so interesting about it is these types of conditions, culturally, it's totally against his stature, right? It's a thing that's considered unclean. You could be socially outcast because, one, it was we don't really know what to do with this. It's very contagious. It's unclean. And there was this assumption by many culturally, well, you've got that because of sin in your family, or it's and so then there was this other thing attached to it that his physical condition competed with his cultural or his status and appearance. All right, so let's leave that and let's go on and read the rest of the passage here. It so happened that Aram, on one of its raiding expeditions against Israel, captured a young girl who became a maid to Naaman's wife. One day she said to her mistress, "Oh, if only my master could meet the prophet of Samaria," which we're going to get to him later. It's Elisha that she's referring to. "He would be healed of this skin disease." Naaman went straight to his master, so that's saying that his king, and reported what the girl from Israel had said. "Well then, go," said the king, "and I'll send a letter of introduction to the king of Israel." Now, I got to pause here again. These two kingdoms are not like friends, okay? These are not groups that get along. And I think the fact that the king looked upon Naaman so favorably is probably the only reason he's willing to write this letter of introduction. And that would have been necessary. Naaman could not have just walked into the king of Israel and gotten an audience, because these two groups are not, they're not compatible, right? But he has so much of a favorable view and respect for Naaman, and understanding, well, this might, he wants his general to be healed. He says, I need this dude fixed, because the other thing about these skin conditions, they're degenerative. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. And so it's probably safe to assume that he's not progressed that far at this point, but it's it's known by everyone that's where it's going. This is going to ruin a man of war if this condition continues. So there's lots of importance on him getting this taken care of. So off he went, Naaman, taking with him about 750 pounds of silver, 150 pounds of gold, and 10 sets of clothes. Another thing pointing to like his status, that he's able to bring these gifts. If we translated that to today, it's easily over $1 million. So this is a significant amount of money. When the king of Israel read the letter, he was terribly upset. He ripped his robe to pieces and he said, "Am I a god with the power to bring death or life, that I get orders to heal this man from his disease? What's going on here?" That king's trying to pick a fight. That's it. Right? So he's like, I'm being punked. I'm being set up. Like, why are they saying, I can't do this? This is not within my power. This guy must just be stirring up trouble. We're getting back to that contentious relationship. Elisha, the man of God, heard what had happened, that the king of Israel was so distressed that he had ripped his robe to shreds. And he sent word to the king. This is Elisha asking the king of Israel, "Why are you so upset, ripping your robes like this? Send him to me, and he'll learn that there's a prophet in Israel." Well, first of all, we need to notice, somehow this never crossed the king's mind. It never crossed it. Hey, you know what? Actually, we have a God-man here. We have a prophet. Like, we have somebody who does this stuff, but that doesn't cross his mind. So Elisha hears about it, sends him a note, says, "Send him here," and then he'll know. So Naaman, with his horses and chariots, arrived in style. I like that. Again, like, he's an important dude, and he knows and thinks of himself as an important dude. So he's got the whole posse. They roll up in style, and they stopped at Elisha's door. Elisha sent out a servant with this message: "Go to the river Jordan and immerse yourself 7 times. Your skin will be healed, and you'll be good as new." Well, first of all, okay, right, so if you're this big, important dude, and you roll up to Elisha's place, and Elisha won't, like, give you an audience, he just sends the messenger guy out to give you instructions. This sets up the next verse. Naaman lost his temper. Like, he lost it. He was like, "Do you know who I am? Like, how can you treat me like this?" He spun around saying, "I thought he'd personally come out and meet me." Again, he thinks his status and his privilege, he needs to be treated a certain way, given certain privileges. And that he would call on the name of God and wave his hand over the diseased spot and it would be gone. So Naaman already has a picture. Can we just pause here? How many of us, when we're dealing with an area where we need healing, already have a picture of how it needs to happen? God, I have this problem and I need you to heal me, and here's how you could do it. This would be okay with me, right? I think maybe that's not the best thing that we should do. So he has this picture. He thinks that's what's going to happen. And then he goes on to say, "The Damascus rivers, Abana and Pharpar, are cleaner by far than any of the rivers in Israel. Why not bathe in them?" In other words, the one you sent me to is not good enough. Like, that's the dirty river. I'd at least get clean. He stomped off, mad as a hornet. Like, this dude is ticked because he feels totally disrespected by the way he's been treated, and he feels like this just is not right. Like, this is not how this should happen. But his servants caught up with him and said, "Father, if the prophet had asked you to do something hard and heroic, wouldn't you have done it? So why not this simple instruction of wash and be clean?" See, if the prophet had given him instructions to go do something elaborate and heroic, where Naaman would still be the picture of, "I'm the dude," he probably would have jumped all over it. And he probably would have felt like he was part of what made it happen, right? So he listens to reason. He listens to his servants. It says, so he did it. Doesn't say whether he did it happily or if he just kind of marched down there still gritting his teeth and grumbling. I'll let you assume that which way you will. But he went down, immediately immersed himself in the Jordan 7 times. Following the orders of the holy man, his skin was healed. It was like the skin of a little baby. He was good as new. I love this. Now, we know this doesn't always happen, but I love that this is, I just have to put this in context. He would have considered himself healed. Everyone would have considered himself healed if the sores just like kind of withered up, and he went back to basically normal. Maybe he could even have a few scars, but it's like it would have been clear that the progression of the disease had stopped. We'd called that healed. In modern terms, a lot of times if you're doing something where you're having to go through like physical therapy to rehabilitate a shoulder or a knee or something, a lot of times the benchmark they'll use is 80% improvement. They're not always going for 100%, right? But they would consider that like, okay. So God's like, no, that's not good enough. I'm going to take this all the way back. It's going to be like the skin of a brand new baby. How many of you love, I like to just smell babies, right? They're cute, but they're just like, there's nothing like that brand new skin of a baby. I haven't had it, for a long time. If we pulled up the baby pictures, maybe I could find it, but he was as good as new. So then he went back to the holy man, he and his entourage, and stood before him and said, I now know beyond the shadow of a doubt that there is no God anywhere on earth other than the God of Israel. And he goes on. I encourage you to read the rest of the passage. I really wanted to preach about why he asked for 2 donkey loads of dirt. I find it really interesting, but we don't have time to go there today, okay? Suffice it to say, Naaman has recognized God. He has been encountered by God. He has been healed by God. He still doesn't fully connect all things, that God is a God of people more than the God of a place. Maybe he wanted to take the dirt because he thought, oh, this must be a place where God is, so I'm going to take this dirt with me home. Oh, okay, I said I was going to leave it alone, and then I started not to leave it alone. Temptations as a preacher. Naaman, I said this at the beginning, but I just want to make this statement again clearly for our context, because I want to begin to show what we're taking from this story and how we're applying it to our context, okay? No amount of status, wealth, accomplishment, or privilege exempts us from the effects of sin, sickness, and disease. In the same way, now I'm just going to say up front, this is another potential rabbit trail, but I'm just going to make this statement. In the same way, the scripture would tell us it rains on the good and bad alike, right? So, in the same way that we say, none of the good, if I could just like paraphrase this really badly, none of the good people are exempt from sin, sickness, and disease, and none of the bad people are exempt from blessings. I'm sorry, that's just the way it is. See, because we read this story and we're like, yeah, that makes sense. But then we also sometimes in our mind inadvertently equate blessings to something I did. You know what? I'm pretty good. I know I'm not perfect, but I'm pretty good. I checked the boxes. I did these things, and so, God's going to bless me. It's like, I don't think that that's how it works. In the same way that Naaman thought, well, I'm a great dude. I'm really accomplished. I've got all the stuff. I've done everything I'm supposed to do, and I'm showing up looking good, and so then God's going to heal me. And I want you to notice, God doesn't look at that pridefulness of Naaman and say, I'm not going to heal you. But what does he do? He says, I'm going to make it so simple that you have to actually be humble to get to it. He says, I'm not going to follow your program name, and I'm not going to do it the way you want it done. I'm going to make it so simple, and the good news, friends, is he does the same for us. He makes it, now not simplistic, I'm not saying that it's not significant, but he makes it simple. It doesn't require all the things that the world might say it would require. You don't have to clean yourself up. You don't have to reach a certain status. You just got to be willing to come before God humbly and be open and willing. All right? Now, let's look at the next thing. It said there in the first few verses about the maid, the gal, who brought all of this to their attention. Well, it's clear that she had a relationship with God. And she knew about the prophet, which again I find interesting. It's like the king forgot that he had a prophet. But this little maid girl, she knew. And she had a relationship with the living God that she knew if he goes and sees the man of God, he could be healed. Like, I wish he would do it because I know that's what's going to happen. For us, our relationship with God means we have an answer to the conditions we see around us. You see, that maid girl was actually not in a great situation. She had been captured, taken away from her home. She's an indentured servant or a slave, depending on how you translate it. And she's in this captive situation. And it's probably of no benefit to her. I'm saying out loud that I'm making some assumptions here, but I think they're reasonable from the context. If Naaman's an angry dude, he might not be like the best person to work for, right? It's reasonable to assume that there's at least a possibility that at some point in time he has treated this girl not nice. Right? I'm just saying, like, let's think about it in the context of what took place. But yet, she knows there's a God in Israel, and he can do these things. And because she has compassion for Naaman, she speaks up about it. See, we have that same ability as we're walking around in our lives, and we encounter people with needs or with God questions. We should have developing in us the compassion of Jesus to realize that we have the answers, not within ourselves, but it's like and in our case, it's no longer, oh, there's a prophet over there in that country. It's, there's a God. And you know, he came and actually dwells with us right here. Actually, I carry him. I work with him. You know, it's like, so I have an answer. And I know that if I could get whichever person I'm looking at, if I could get you in touch with God's reality, there's an answer. And it's not my cleverness, it's not my good advice, it's the power and the presence of King Jesus. But we have to have relationship with him in order to stay in touch with that reality and to recognize when we bump into people, hey, you know, I don't know anything about that problem you're facing, but I'm pretty sure my God knows what to do about that. Would you mind if I prayed for you? Would you mind if I just invited his presence to come right now? Because whenever he shows up, like, stuff changes. I don't know. And it's good to hold it with an open hand like that. We don't need to go around promising people. You know, unless you just have a strong gift of faith in the moment. I'm not against that. You know, sometimes a gift of faith will give you the ability to just say, no, this is going to happen. But if you're not experiencing that gift, I think it's okay to just say, you know, this is the kind of stuff my God does. Can we invite him and see what happens? I don't know. I think it would be interesting. We talked about this a little bit already, but Naaman's status, and I could label it Naaman's pride, almost kept him from encountering healing. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody but me, but how often has my pride or my ego or my assumption that I've got things pretty well put together, that I know what I'm doing and I'm pretty sure I'm right. I know what this is supposed to look like, and that humility thing doesn't look too attractive. How many times do thoughts and attitudes like that keep us from stepping into what God has for us? It may not be healing. I could tell you the stories of some of the big moves that we've made in our life and in our ministry. You know, where things just didn't make sense. Like, I'll tell you just a little bit of this story. It'll be a recap for some of you, but when Brittany and I were living in Champaign-Urbana, we had struggled with infertility for 3 years, and we were constantly, you know, getting prayer for that, praying about that, seeing all sorts of people in our small group actually get healed from that and celebrating with them as they have babies while we're still struggling with this unfulfilled promise. And in the midst of that, God begins speaking to us about a big move. This is when we moved to North Carolina, but the requirement of that was stepping into the unknown. Both of us were born and raised in Southern Illinois, never lived anywhere else. Neither one of us, we initiated the move having jobs lined up that fell through. And God just kept pushing. This is where I'm taking you. This is where I'm taking you. Are you willing to give up everything? And we didn't know what give up everything meant. One practical example was due to I only say hilarious now. It was maddening and frustrating at the time. Due to a mix-up, I'll call it, with U-Haul, we weren't able to even take all of our stuff. We were doing like the pod thing, where you fill up the box and they ship it. Long story, it got delayed a bunch of hours. By the time we fill it up and realized we need a second one, they're closed and we're leaving at like midnight. And so we went to North Carolina with only half of our stuff. Every time we came home for Christmas for the next 2 years, we got another carload. Long story, but it required us to let go of everything that we knew and experienced in daily life. To move 15 hours away from family, meaning both our biological family and our Vineyard family, who we had been, working with and ministering with for the last 3 years. It meant, making all new friends. Just everything was on the table. We had no idea what it looked like. We literally arrived in North Carolina and moved into an extended stay hotel for 2 weeks. Then we ended up staying with a local pastor because it happened to be at the time like real estate was just crazy. Like you couldn't rent an apartment. It took us like 8 weeks to just even find one. And the only way we ended up renting a little one-bedroom apartment was a gal that had just signed a lease, and then she got a job that moved her away, and so she's looking for somebody to take. So we swooped in and took over her lease and rented this little one-bedroom apartment. I'm talking like 500 square feet. Like this is small. 2 weeks after we moved into that apartment, so this is about 2 months, I guess, into us moving out there, we got pregnant with Arthur. And I still remember, this is like the craziest thing, because we're surrounded by boxes, because we came from even though we only brought half of our stuff, we came from like a 1,500 square foot house to a 500 square foot, so even half of our stuff. I just feel like we're living surrounded by boxes. And all of a sudden from the other room I hear, 2 lines, Maddie, 2 lines. And this promise that we've been waiting on all of a sudden was like right there in reach. Now, I'm not saying if we hadn't moved to North Carolina, we wouldn't have kids now. I can't say that. But something about the heart posture of being able to hold everything that we held dear with an open hand, being willing to let go. See, I truly believe in this statement that John Wimber made decades ago. There'll be several times throughout your life where the next thing that God has for you is going to cost you everything you've gained up to that point. And sometimes we go through that once and we think, all right, I've done that. I'm in the will of God now. I'm good. I'm going to go for it. And you go along a little ways and then all of a sudden, hey, I want it all again. But the promise on the other side of that sacrifice is, I'm taking you somewhere. I'm healing you. I'm putting you on a mission. I'm filling you with my Spirit. Pride can keep us from hearing God. I'm guilty, right? I could tell you probably 6 other stories where I heard God clearly and I didn't do it. But I have some amazing promises fulfilled from when I've been able to set that aside and not allow because see, here's the thing. God is adamant. I mean, he's like insatiable that you can be healed, set free from whatever's holding you back. But more than that, see, that's not even his aim. His aim is that you get filled with a purpose. That like the way that he made you, when he thought of you before you were even in your mother's womb, he thought, every one of you is like a unique creation, and that he wired you and made you at a molecular level to serve a particular purpose in the kingdom of God. And this life and the enemy does everything to try to keep us from that. And God says, I want to heal you so you can walk in purpose, so that you can wake up every day knowing that because I live my life, the purposes of God are moving forward. That sounds, I don't know about you, but like, that sounds good to me. I don't feel every day like I'm there, but I believe that it's possible. And this is the reason we need to be willing to sometimes give God everything. This is the reason we need to sometimes be willing to be uncomfortable when God brings something up that needs healed. He doesn't want us to be uncomfortable, but he's willing to let us be uncomfortable if it means that he can heal the things that are broken so that we can be set free, so that we can move forward. Because hearing God is the key. I've said this before, but I want to press on it a little bit. If we talk about real life, it's not found in the things that we do. It's not found in the activities. See, I could say, well, I moved across the country and then God blessed us with a miracle child. So next time I need something, I got to move across the other side. We can get so formulaic with these things, right? The life that is to be found is in his voice. It's in intimate relationship of hearing his voice, because here's the key. Let's use money for an example, because it's an easy one. Sometimes God's whisper is, I want you to give everything. Like, I want you to do something crazy. I'm not being specific here, and I'm not pointing at anybody, but it's like, sometimes God says, I've blessed you with these resources, and now I want you to go give them all away. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes God says, let me illustrate it this way. It's the difference between bread and seed. All wealth is a gift from God. Can we agree with that? Like, we're stewards only. Yes, we work for things, and but it all comes from God. It all belongs to him. And so he gets to tell me what to do with it. And sometimes he says, I want to use you as a conduit to bless people. I want to use you to further my purposes. And sometimes he says, this is for you. It's okay. Like, and that's the key, is that we can think. So there have been times when we've been called on to give extravagantly, like a whole year's salary in a single gift. And I could make that a formula, right? So I could reach a different point in my life and say, well, God, look at what he did there. Well, I'm just going to try that again. It doesn't work if it's not what God is saying. Do you see what I'm getting at? It's not in the activities. It's not in, I just got to make a bigger sacrifice this time. It's in the voice. It's in learning to trust him and what he's saying, regardless of what it is. Whatever you're facing today, or perhaps you're watching and you haven't really even fully investigated this, like, what is this idea of having a relationship with Jesus? Because that's the thing that I want us to take away from this story, is that the person that turned the tides in this story is the maid, the one who had a relationship with God. And we could follow Naaman's story out, try to find out, does that healing, obviously he encountered God, and many times those encounters lead to relationship. He definitely didn't have it all figured out right away. There's this common condition that afflicts all of humanity. It's not a skin disease. It's what we referenced earlier. It's the effect of sin. And we've loosely defined sin here as anything that separates us from God. Like it's not, again, it's not about the activity. There is right and wrong. There is moral absolute. I'm not denying any of that. But the essence of what sin is that thing which separates me relationally from my Maker. Like, and that's what the concern is. Because when I do that, there's an effect to that, right? But Jesus, in the same way that we read about Elisha offering Naaman a healing, God offers us a simple solution. It's not simplistic, but a simple solution. He can heal that condition. If you feel like in your life God is far away, maybe you feel like you don't know Him at all, or maybe you do know Him, but you just feel like, it used to feel like we were tighter, we were closer. God has a simple cure for that. Jesus offers a healing cure for the human condition. Jesus offers the possibility for things to be set right in your life. And that includes our theology for physical healing. Like, when God's kingdom is present, things get set right. Because that's the reality that we're moving towards. I never get tired of reminding us that when the fullness of the kingdom of God comes, all this stuff that's messed up won't be messed up anymore. We won't have to figure out how to get out of an awkward conversation. Am I speaking to any introverts? We won't have to figure out how to keep going when we're in pain, even chronic pain. We won't have to figure out how to deal with unpleasant family members. Like, the list could go on and on and on. All the dynamics that are messed up in our world will be set right. But we also believe that Jesus operates outside of space and time. And so there are times, and I hope more and more times as the people of God come alive, get awake, get in touch with this, that future reality touches right now. That Jesus comes in ways that His kingdom becomes present in our midst. See, one of our common values that we talk about here all the time is that Jesus doesn't have to be far away. He can be as close as the end of your fingertips. Like he's present, and not just like in a way that, well, yes, that makes sense philosophically, and I know, No, like you can experience Him as with you. Some of you right now are even just like, maybe you don't know what it is, but you just feel like a little bit of His presence. It might feel like just a little bit of weightiness on your hands. Or it might just feel like a whoosh of peace. We can experience God like, I keep going, you know this song, and I can't quote all the lyrics, but when you walk into the room, everything changes, right? Like we would believe that. If physically in the flesh, Jesus walked into the room, like He'd be in charge of the program. Like everything would revolve around, Jesus is here. The fact that He is not physically manifest, He said when He left, He told His disciples, I need to go, but I'm sending another one. I'm sending the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is God. And so He can walk in the room. I have no doubt. He's here now. And the most important thing is not what I say about it. It's just being in His presence. And this is our whole job. Open, willing, and vulnerable. To be with Jesus. To do what Jesus does. To say what Jesus says. Have I ever defined this for you? Do you know what the simple goal, and this is not something I can create, which is why it's a little frustrating for me. Do you know what the simple goal of our preaching here at Vineyard Peoria is? The simple goal is to create encounters with God. The simple goal is that you would walk away from this time feeling like God spoke to you, not Matthew. That whether it's through the things I say or things he whispers or however he moves, that's the goal. Not that you honest to goodness, I hope you forget my clever stories. I hope they're just a vehicle to move you towards openness in a way that you can then experience God being in the room.